And so when we regard ourselves too highly, when we think about ourselves as though we are more important than we really are, or somehow we are more, valuable or more right,
or better,
more righteous than we actually are, that shows in a conflict.
Salut, sunt Livia! Bine ai venit la podcastul Fetele, Fără, roz. Sper că ai nimerit bine. Aici discutăm despre viață, Dumnezeu, carieră, băieți, feminitate și despre multe alte teme. De fiecare dată te invit să iei parte la discuții care nu sunt bazate pe concepții personale sau sentimente, ci pe cuvântul lui Dumnezeu.
Hei, mă bucur foarte mult că ai revenit la un nou episod Fetele Fără roz. Din nou video, nu mă așteptam să fac așa de repede, dar mă bucur foarte mult să fac lucrul ăsta. Dar astăzi am pe cineva cu mine, după cum vedeți, dar cu părere de rău vă zic că discuția de astăzi va avea loc în limba engleză. Pentru cei care doriți să-l vedeți cu traducere, cu subtitrare, va fi pus cu subtitrare pe YouTube. În rest se va auzi doar limba engleză. Așa că din start vă zic să-mi scuzați limba engleză, e ok cât știu eu știe mai multă, vă zic imediat de ce. Așa că vă invit să ascultați o discuție între mine și prietena mea despre un subiect foarte interesant. Dar până aici cu limba română, de acum în engleză. So, hello and welcome to my podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. She is one of my dearest friends, and I let her introduce herself.
Well, thanks for having me. This is really fun, and it's actually the first time I've ever done a podcast. So,
woohoo!
I'm Chrissie Baker, and my husband is Jerry Baker, and he works at PDF, which is a camp near.
She lives in a camp.
I do.
24/7.
And so, my husband and I are both Canadian, and we have 2 daughters, and we moved here to Romania about 5 years ago. So to do this podcast in Romanian for me would be really difficult. I could talk about the weather or pizza or other inconsequential things.
And
coffee.
Yeah.
Or other things. But to talk about something like this is difficult for me in Romanian to explain exactly what I want to say. So we'll stay with English today.
Yes, we will stay with English today. And today's theme, it's conflict. It's something that we all have to deal with, even if we want it or not. And it's something that it's in our lives so much. Sometimes too much.
Yes.
But it's over there. So let's start. The first question is how I love to say let's define what conflict means. What is a conflict?
Well, conflict is something, like you said, that exists in every relationship.
Yeah.
And it's any kind of fight or battle or struggle between 2 people.
At least 2 people?
Yeah, at least 2 people. Conflict can exist, just in an interpersonal relationship between 2 people. It can be friends, can be family members, married couple, any kind of thing like that. It can be internal, it can also be external, so it can be, the conflict can exist inside of you, maybe with another person, but the other person might not know. But the conflict still exists in you, so it can be internal, or it can be external. Conflict can also be public or private, which means it can be things that are visible, like behaviors and things you can see or hear, or it can be also things that are invisible. So that would be things like being passive aggressive or those kinds of things. Conflict can exist in just a relationship between 2 people, and it can also exist in a relationship with more than one person or on a team even. It's what we'd say pervasive. It exists. It's universal. It exists.
And it's everywhere.
In every area of our
life. Our houses, in our churches, in our camps, and wherever we live.
In our homes.
Yes, it's like everywhere. Why does conflict exist?
Well, I think as a Christian, the the right answer is that conflict exists because of our sin.
And
so
that's the start.
Yeah. I mean, we know that conflict is, we would say, a byproduct of sin. It's something that happens because of our sin. One of my favorite Bible teachers is Paul David Tripp. He's written a lot of good books, and I follow him on social media, and he posts a lot of really good sermons. And he talks about sin as being fundamentally antisocial, because the sin in our life, it causes us to love ourselves more than loving others.
And that's the basic of sin.
Yeah, it's selfishness.
Yes.
Yeah. And it causes us to value ourselves and what we want and what we need more than valuing others and their needs or their wants. And
me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
So it's like if it's everything for me and myself and I, as I just said, it's easy to start the conflict.
Yeah, and it comes often from our sense of entitlement, or like our sense of self-righteousness. Like somehow I am better than you, and so I'm approaching the conflict in this way. So and often too, like in our sin, we don't extend forgiveness and we don't extend grace to people. So and I think in the book of James, chapter 4, it says, what is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's very clear that these fights, these conflicts we have with each other, they come from inside. They come from these evil desires that we all have inside of us.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And also, we don't have a full perspective. I think it's, as humans, sometimes we forget that, like, we don't see things the way that God sees them. We see things in our limited perspective. And so we often can start conflicts or make conflicts worse by believing, or like, I guess you could call it making an idol out of your own perspective, and looking at your own perspective as though it is the truth. And that is
the perspective.
Yeah.
And as you said, we don't have God's perspective, but we don't have the other person perspective. Like that too. Like we don't know what all the story with the person that we have a conflict. Like we might know something, but not everything. So it's really good to know that when you are in a conflict, because not what if you will be in a conflict, because
when
it's like you will be, or you are, or you were, but try to understand this. You don't know everything. So you're not God, because this is another sin that we love, to be God, to be like God. So because we don't have the whole image like this, we usually start the conflict because we don't have the whole story, and we will never have it till we be in heaven.
Or when we're in the middle of it, we make it worse.
That too. So conflict exists. That's not something that we decide if it is or it's not. It's there. We have to deal with it. So what do we do?
Well, I think the key to, and I have learned that the key to dealing with conflict in a way that is God honoring is to change the way that we look at conflict.
Okay, stop here, because the first word that I loved from what you said, it's learned. So sorry, but this is something that we have to understand with ourselves. We are not perfect. Doesn't matter on what stage you are in life, on what stage we are in life. We're not perfect, so we're still learning, and we still have to learn things. So, go on.
Yeah, well, my learning began, I actually studied conflict, and it's called conflict resolution studies, when I was in university in Canada, which is, I graduated about 15 years ago or so, which is like dating myself. But I studied education, and so part of my Bachelor of Arts degree was studying conflict and psychology and those kinds of things. And so I learned a lot through my studies, taking courses about family conflict and counseling and interpersonal conflict and team conflict and stuff like that. But then also I've been married for 16 and a half years.
Yeah.
And so I think my husband would agree we've had our fair share of conflict in our marriage. And I think every marriage probably has. I don't think it's unique to us.
No, it's not.
And we also have 2 children. And so, now I'm learning how to navigate conflict as a parent, conflict with my children, and how to teach my children about conflict. So
because you have to supervise their conflict.
Yes. and coach them and teach them what are productive and God-honoring ways of resolving conflict with each other. And also modeling that for them in our home. So
we have to learn. Yes, but we have to learn. Like we don't have this in our lives just because. It's not there just because I always know how to deal with conflict. No, we have to learn. It's a process.
And part of it is because of our sinful nature, right? Like we're pulled towards sort of the wrong way of coaching each other, and I think we've all experienced that before. And so that's why learning ways that are God-honoring to deal with conflict is the way to go.
So my question was, what do we do?
Well, I think, and I just want to say one thing quickly first.
Yeah.
As we're talking today, I think it's important to note that for anybody listening who's maybe in an abusive relationship, or in a situation, in an abusive family or an abusive marriage or relationship or something like that, we're not talking to you with some of these things because
that's a different approach.
Yes.
And you should seek for help.
Yes, absolutely.
You don't have to neglect that and just put it aside and say, I have to love and whatever.
Well, and some of these strategies we're going to talk about today, they don't apply to a situation like that because if a person's being abused, they should seek help and not take responsibility for things in the relationship that aren't theirs. I just felt like I had to say that.
Yeah, and thank you very much.
Yeah. So. I guess, though, to answer your question, I think one of the things that we often learn in church about conflict is that the goal should be not to have conflict.
Yeah.
And over the years in my studies and also just in my study of the word and in my own experience, I really come to understand that that's actually not the goal. That shouldn't be the goal because it's not, first of all, it's not possible.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. As long as we have sin in our lives, the conflict will be there.
Yes, and we also see the damage. I think each of us, if we really thought about it, we could see the damage that trying to pretend that we're perfect does in our churches and in our relationships.
And to us too.
Yes.
It's like asking so much from you. Like, I'm perfect, so I always have to be perfect. My hair always have to stay like this. No, my hair is not like this. It's the first time in a month like this, so enjoy it. I see it because I'm not going to see it very too often in my life. Or I always have to have my nails done and all these perfect things that you have to, like, if my life have to look perfect all the time, it's tiring and it's not honoring God.
Well, and also in our behavior too. Like, so I think sometimes as Christians we think that, I'm a Christian, so that means everything I do is right and everything I do honors God, and that's just not true.
Yeah.
Because I'm a Christian and I know everything I do does not honor God, and I know that I come to my relationships sometimes with really bad attitudes or sinful thinking, and so and for that reason, because we're all imperfect, even if we're Christ followers, that we understand that conflict is a reality. And so I think the absence of conflict shouldn't be the goal, because sometimes, for several reasons. The first one is the absence of conflict is not always the absence of conflict. Just because you can't see a conflict is there doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
There can be times in a relationship where you're not really talking, and there's some big dysfunction going on, and it can look from the outside that everything is fine, but everything is not fine.
Yeah.
And so just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
The second thing is that lack of conflict in a relationship between two people, it can also be a signal of some major dysfunction in the relationship. So like a lack of accountability.
Yeah. So true.
A lack of commitment to the relationship, right? If you know, I'm in a relationship with someone and I'm not really committed to the relationship, I don't really care, then I'm probably not going to have much conflict with that person, because we're not going to really, talk about anything important.
Yeah.
Also, it can signal a lack of intimacy, like relational intimacy or emotional intimacy. If you don't ever go deep with someone and get to the real issues, then probably you're not going to disagree on anything that
this
important.
Makes so much sense. Like you go, if you're just superficial with people around you never get conflict. Like it's
rarely, Or if you do, it's conflict about things that aren't very important.
Yeah.
And so they're not like deep conflicts.
So as you go deep with someone, you discover sin in their lives.
Sure.
Actually, that's the problem.
And they discover sin in yours.
Yeah, that was what I was about to say, but thank you.
Yeah.
So that means you just discover, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, and also like a lack of vulnerability. So if you don't feel you can be honest with the person that you're in a relationship with, then you're probably not going to have a conflict. I mean, the conflict will still exist because it's going to be in you, but they might not know about it. So it can also be like a fear of conflict. Like some people avoid conflict because they're afraid to confront someone or whatever. And so in a relationship in which one person's afraid, then there looks like there's no conflict.
Where I have this thing, if it's something that I don't know about, I'm not responsible for. Because I'm kind of the person that is afraid of conflict because I didn't grow up with a normal conflict in my life, let's say like approach normally. So the way that I've seen when I was a child, how people approach conflict, I didn't like it. And I was always running away and decide maybe it's better to not know about it. And if I don't know about it, it doesn't exist, which we just decided it's not true. It's there. So I think this is really important to realize that conflict exists. It's present. We need to be aware of this and to know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good.
And also, like in my study of scripture, I found it really interesting that the New Testament is so full of instructions about how to live at peace with one another. Ooh. And if
one example, or you have more?
Oh, I have lots of examples I could give you, but I think what it tells me is that it assumes that we're going to have trouble in our relationships with each other. I mean, most of Paul's letters to the churches talk about, not all of them, but most of them, talk about resolving conflicts or living at peace with each other. And why would he write those things if we didn't need to hear it?
Yeah, because we need it.
And I think, in Ephesians 4, it talks about bearing with one another in love. It talks about speaking truthfully to one another, not to talk to or to talk about one another unwholesomely, being kind, compassionate, not being overcome by anger with one another. Romans 12 talks about living at peace with everyone, don't seek revenge, living in harmony.
So we need to read the Bible.
Yeah. Philippians 2, this is my favorite passage in the New Testament about conflict. So if you're going to read one, read this one. But it talks about standing together with one purpose, being united, taking interest in each other, being humble and considering others better than yourselves. Yeah. And that's actually the passage of scripture we had read at our wedding.
Oh, that's so nice.
Which, it seemed kind of unromantic to many people who were there.
It's not 1 Corinthians 13.
No.
Oh.
But to us, it was more important because that's the kind of relationship we want to have. We want to put each other first, and we want to consider each other as better than ourselves. And we don't always do it perfectly, obviously. But that's sort of our goal. Yeah.
You're not in heaven. In heaven, you'll be perfect. But not here.
No. So I think if we weren't supposed to know how to handle conflict, we wouldn't be told over and over and over in scripture how to handle conflict.
This is something that I've learned in Bible studies in our church. Is if something is present in the Bible, that means that's we will have to deal with it. Like I read something this morning. I read about in Jeremiah. About God saying to Jeremiah that I'm with you even when you will go through and say some bad things over there. And I was reading and I was like, we always take this part like I'm with you, but we never take the second one. And the second one is actually more important because that means not more important, but that will be present in our life and the conflict because it's in so many passages. That means that we have to deal with conflict, and we have because we have it in our lives, we need to do it in a way that will honor God, because we really have to. We will have conflict all the time, and I think we need to know how to handle it in a God-honoring way.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and like I think what I love too about these New Testament passages that talk about conflict, they're not condemning. They're not condemning the church for having conflict. It's not like, you idiots, what's wrong with you? It's like, no, you guys, come on, deal with it with patience, deal with it with love, bear with each other, bear each other's burdens, be patient with one another, stand together. It's just these reminders of the things that we need to do.
And don't look perfect, because it's not true. First of all, it's a lie.
Yeah.
Even in a church that we say we don't have conflict, that's a lie.
Yeah.
Because of course there's conflict, because there is sin. Even if we sometimes don't want to say it out loud, but the conflict is there. But let's approach it in a good way and seek help and ask for God to show you how to do it. And Chrissie just said a few passages. If you need just rewind. Yes, rewind a few seconds back and hear them again and look in the scripture and just ask God how to do it, because the Bible, it's really open to us. And Chrissie has here some images, let's say like this, that I want to show you, but not now. I want to post it later. And if you just let us know a little bit about what's that images over there.
So they'll be able to see it on the screen as I'm talking?
Yeah, I think, or maybe we will have a second post just with the images.
Somehow.
Yeah.
So, there's a few things I wanted to share about, sort of like structures or strategies.
Yeah.
Because it's important to first, like we've already talked about, to change the way that we think about conflict.
Yes.
But it's also helpful to have some specific sort of tangible tools that we can use to deal with conflict. And so I guess let's talk first about misunderstandings.
Yes, because that's a big part.
Yes. And also what's important to know about misunderstandings is that misunderstandings don't have to become a conflict. They often do, but they don't have to. So this model is something that actually my and my husband's counselor, Christian counselor, taught us a few months ago. And it's been something that has been really, really valuable for me in our relationship and just how we handle conflict. And I think even in a cross-cultural setting too, this works. I think in any culture this works. So it's important to remember that there are two sort of realms in which conflict takes place. It takes place in the public realm and also in the private realm. Any conflict, any kind of interaction. There are things that are public that are like visible, right?
Yes.
So, when I greet you, you hear my voice, you see my facial expression. Those are things I'm talking about, like public things.
Something that everyone can see.
There's also things that are private. So public things are actions, right? Things we would say, and private things we would say would be intent and effect. So in the diagram that I hope you can see on your screen.
Yes, in a way we will show it to you.
You can see that a misunderstanding begins with an intention. So I have an intention, maybe it started with a thought that I had about Livia.
Okay.
And then that intention turns into an action. So the intention is private,
but the action,
which turns into an action, which is public. People can see, Livia can see. And then when Livia receives that action, that turns into an effect. So it has an effect on her, positive or negative.
Yeah.
She can't see my intention.
I can assume.
And I can't see the effect that my action or my intention had on her, or my action had on her. We can make an assumption about what the intent was or what the effect was. But the point is that making an assumption is almost always the wrong thing to do. And when we make an assumption, so when we make an assumption about someone else's intention, so if Livia made an assumption about what my intention was in saying something to you, that can create a conflict. It's like lighting a match and throwing it on a fire or on a pile of wood. But instead of assuming what my intention was, the thing to do is to ask, to communicate.
Yes.
So instead of making an assumption, then you engage in communication.
Yes, but this is something that, and I'm speaking on behalf of my culture right now, it's something, and you've seen that, you know that,
yeah.
But it's something that we usually don't do. We don't ask questions. I mean, even at school, the teachers were telling us, like, if you have questions, ask, but nobody was asking any questions. Like, at the end of the day, we don't have any questions. Because if I ask a dumb question, people will think I'm dumb, so maybe nobody needs to know that, or stuff like that. So it's something that we usually do. We just think and have assumptions, but we don't ask the questions. And I think this is really, really important to ask, what was your intention, instead of putting a label on it, like,
yeah, or me trying to say, I know what your intention was. I don't actually know what your intention was. I should ask you. And this same counselor, he often told us, you need to communicate with a sense of curiosity instead of a sense of judgment. And so coming from a place of curiosity to say to someone, hey, just curious, what did you mean by what you said to me earlier? And giving the person a chance to clarify.
Yeah.
And maybe they did mean to hurt you. That sometimes happens. Maybe they did mean to say something hurtful, or maybe they didn't realize that they hurt you with what they said. Maybe maybe you were misreading their intentions.
Yeah.
But never to make an assumption about what someone else's intention was.
Yeah. Or good or bad.
Right.
Both of them.
Yeah.
Don't make it, and ask from a place of curiosity. This is
not
something.
judgment.
Yes, not judgment. This is something that I think we have to take with us all the time, and be. I think it's like an exercise, or like a muscle that you have to exercise to grow, because it's so easy to make a statement of like a judgment, like to have this judgment eyes with you, but it's not comfortable, and it's not like easy to go and ask the questions. But in the moment that you ask the question, actually everything gets easier. I think this is how I see this thing, because when you go with the judgment in your face or in your eyes, you always have this, like, let's say, labels on people, and you walk around and know everything about everyone, but you don't let them show you who they are.
Yeah.
And you miss a lot of good things and bad, but because we have them both, but I think we miss things when we do this.
And it breaks down relationships.
Yes.
It just does. If you don't open the lines of communication, it doesn't do anything good for your relationship with the person.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I hope we will have this on the screen or somewhere.
Somehow.
Yes.
And the second thing I wanted to share is something called the Iceberg Model. And so maybe some of you have heard of this before, because it's pretty famous. But I think it's one of the most valuable things that I learned when I was studying conflict resolution, is to look at conflict like an iceberg. Now, I'm from Canada, so I've actually never seen an iceberg.
No.
My husband has. But we have them in Canada on the East Coast. And,
we don't have them anywhere.
No icebergs in the Black Sea. But they're so beautiful and majestic. And if you've never seen one, you should Google it and look at pictures of them. But they're just these like massive chunks of ice in the ocean. And what is so interesting about an iceberg is that on average, only about 10% of the iceberg is actually above the water.
Just 10?
Yes. So if you can see how massive they are above the water, imagine how massive they are under the water.
Yeah, so it's just, okay.
So when we compare conflict to an iceberg, as a metaphor, we apply that same principle. Okay. So only about 10% of a conflict is what is visible, and the rest is below the surface, is things that are things that are not visible.
So 90%.
Yeah, I mean, it's a principle. It's not
exact
percentage, but
I know.
Yes.
But if you think like
so much,
I don't know numbers, the measures, and whatever. But if you think that this is 10% and the rest is here, I think it's big.
Yes, it's massive.
Yeah.
And so if we're in a conflict with someone and we're only focusing on the part that we can see, then we're missing out on a lot of other things. And so what we do is we say that the part that is above the surface, the visible part, that is what we call our positions. So let's say you and I are having a conflict about a specific issue.
Okay.
The parts that are visible are our positions. You think this way, I think this way.
Okay, so this is let's say 10%.
Yeah, so these are our positions. Now, our positions are the part that's above the surface. It can also include, the opinions we're sharing about the issue. It can also include our behavior, like our body language, our tone of voice, like all of those things that are visible in a conflict. Yeah, the strategies that we're using to communicate with each other, all of that stuff. What's under the surface is what we call the interests of each person in the conflict. And these things can include a lot of different things. So it can be opinions maybe that we have about the topic that we're not sharing, things we think that we're not saying. It can be like our values, so like things that are important to us. It can be biases, which is like kind of a fancy word for like, this is the way I was brought up to think, and so I think about everything this way, right?
I think like this. But it's like the way I was raised, where I was raised, and all of this, all my
influences my thinking.
Yes, and this is who I am. So
it can be interests can also be like your needs. It can be assumptions you're making about the situation or the other person. It can be experiences that you've had in the past that have influenced you about a certain topic.
So it's all the things that usually you don't see, and usually we don't talk about it.
Exactly. And so this positions versus interest approach to conflict is, I have found so valuable, because it helps me and also the people that I'm in a conflict with find common ground. So rarely when you're in a conflict with someone are you going to find common ground in your positions, right?
Yeah.
We disagree on an issue, like for example, I want to paint the wall blue, you want to paint it red, right? that's a tough example.
But
we have different views.
Yes.
But when we get below the surface, when we go from our positions, we go to interests.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to paint it red because when you were a child, your room was red. And so that's a memory or that's an experience you had that's important to you. Dumb example. But you get the idea. Right? And so it allows the two people to find common ground. Maybe they have common values. Maybe they have had common experiences that will bring them together about the issue. Maybe they've got similar fears.
And they can make the world half and half.
Yeah.
If they will go to this interest.
But generally this interests approach, instead of focusing on the positions on the issue, going kind of underneath the iceberg, focusing on the interests, people's individual needs, their desires, their fears, they're talking about past experiences or influences, values. Those are the things where you're going to find a lot of common ground, hopefully, with the other person. Yeah. And that will give you a starting point to resolving the conflict. And so, as I have been in conflict in my life, obviously this isn't a model that a lot of people maybe know about or whatever, but I've even found it helpful to model this approach when I'm in a conversation with someone and I'm having a disagreement with them or conflict with them. So what I'll often do is I'll explain my position on the issue, but then I'll volunteer interests. So I'll give a reason. Like, the reason why my position is this is because when I was a young girl, I had this experience and it influenced me. Or like, I have a deep need in my life to feel this way or to be this or to whatever. So to volunteer some of those interests
will help the conflict, actually.
Well, what it does is it opens up like an invitation for the other person to reciprocate, right?
Yeah.
So if they hear like, oh, you had that experience, something similar happened to me, and then maybe they'll be more likely to share one of their interests, right? Something from below the surface.
All the time when someone else shares more than you think or expect, usually what it does to the other person is to open up again.
Yeah, gives them an invitation.
Yes, like they will open up to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and so I mean this is a strategy that we use in mediation.
Oh yeah.
When resolving a conflict as a third party, between two people. This is a mediation strategy that is used often, but I find I use it in my daily life all the time. I use it with my children.
Yeah, and I think it's working.
Yeah, well, we'll see. But it's working. But I use it to help them to communicate more effectively, because it's not effective if you're in a conflict with someone. It's not effective to just say, this is what I think, and I'm not backing down. But like, why? Why do you think that way? Why is that something that's important to you? And to teaching my children to like be able to explain that to other people, to each other. Mostly they're in conflict with each other. I think that's the way it is for all families.
But that's
teaching that to them and modeling that for them and helping them, coaching them to be able to share their interests, those things that are under the surface with one another. So, and I also think, and this is especially important for me living in a cross-cultural environment. Yeah. But when I take this approach to conflicts that I'm in, especially with people from different cultures, when I look at conflict this way, it helps me not take things so personally. Because I'm the kind of person that takes things personally.
No, you're the only one. Yeah. No. We don't. We are perfect.
And I think probably there's people who can identify with me about taking things personally. And why this helps me is because what this model shows is that people's behavior and their positions and the things that are above the surface in a conflict, they're motivated by their interests, their needs, right? Their experiences, their fears. And so how a person is dealing with a conflict, it says more about them than it says about me, right? Yeah. It's not about me, it's about their interests. They're communicating this way, or they're having these positions because they have these interests, this set of interests. And so it's actually not about me at all, and which I find really freeing.
Yeah, because if it's about you, everything gets personal.
Well, and also then it can make the conflict worse. Yes. Like me taking things personally, if a colleague or a friend or something says something in a way that hurts me, I need to take a step back and be like, okay, there's probably some interests there behind what that person said or how they said it, and it's probably saying more about them and what their interests are than it is about me. And I find, at least in my life, when I take things personally, it just makes the conflict worse. It doesn't make it any better. So, yes.
Because when we try to be selfish, never ends well.
No, it doesn't help a conflict when we come with selfishness. Definitely not.
Okay, so how we approach conflict. Let's go there. Let's see something more practical. How we approach a conflict, because I want this to be something that we will never forget. We will have conflicts in our lives.
Yeah, I think, there's lots of different ways that people approach conflict. One model that I like is, it gives sort of 5 different typical approaches to conflict. And I think, at least in my own life, I've been all of these 5 at different times in different relationships. So I don't see this as an exhaustive tool, like you are one of these types and it's not like a personality test. Yes. It's like, okay, as I'm coming to a conflict, I can respond in, or in a relationship, I can come to it in one of these 5 ways. Yeah. And, which one is the one that I have a tendency to do, which one is a goal for me, that kind of thing. So, so these 5 approaches to conflict, the first one would be a competing approach to conflict. And these are the people who they are more concerned about the issue than they are about the person. And so if you're in a conflict with a person who's competing, then more often than not, you're going to be in some kind of win-lose power struggle. Yes. Because these are the people who they think what they think, and nothing you can say can convince them otherwise. And they are more attached to their way of thinking than they are maybe to you. Yes. And so being a competing person you're not a fun person to be around generally. It's not easy to be in a relationship with somebody who views conflict this way or approaches conflict this way.
So competing in the first one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the second one would be avoiding, and so that's kind of like almost kind of opposite, not exactly. And so people who avoid conflict, they generally they have low concern for the relationship, and they also have low concern for whatever the issue is. They just don't want to have any part of the conflict at all, and so they tend to withdraw. So people who avoid, they withdraw from relationships, they withdraw from conflict situations because they just don't want to deal with it. They're not concerned for either of those things.
Okay.
Then there are people who accommodate, and those are the people who are not that concerned about the issue. They're very concerned about the people involved, and so the relationships. So they will sacrifice, they will do anything they can to make the conflict go away. They'll give in. So their goal is to have harmony in the relationship and not necessarily to focus on the actual issue.
Okay.
Another approach would be to collaborate. So collaborating, that would be people who are highly concerned about the relationship, also highly concerned about whatever the issue is. And these people, they always want a win-win. They want you to win, and they want them to win too.
Okay.
And then the fifth is compromising. And so in this model, the goal is, the way this model describes compromising is kind of the goal, that both people come to the table with a willingness to value the relationship, also to value the issue, and to find some kind of middle ground that works for everyone involved.
So not in a bad way compromising?
No. No, not necessarily. I think it depends on the situation.
Yes, but compromising in a way that you both just take the iceberg, and search
and everybody gives and takes. A little bit. And again, like obviously every situation is different.
Yes.
There are certain situations where maybe you don't want to compromise on something that's like incredibly important to you. And in that case, that's fine. And so I'm definitely not saying that compromising is always the goal. Depends on the situation. But I think a model like this is really important because it allows us to be kind of reflective a little bit, to like think about, okay, what is my attitude here? How am I approaching this conflict? Am I approaching it with like a sense of competition? Am I avoiding? Am I accommodating too much? And like, in my own life, I've seen myself in a variety of these different types and been able to kind of like self-correct a little bit. Like, okay, maybe in this relationship, I'm being a little too accommodating. And that's not actually helping the other person. And it's definitely not helping me. So maybe I need to, be a little bit more collaborative, and I need to maybe stand up for myself.
I think we need to be wise.
Yeah.
I think this is the term that we have to use.
Sure.
We need to be wise with this, and we need to be like, what I hear all the time is people are saying this. I'm overthinker. Like I'm overthinking everything. Okay, good for you. I'm doing this, and I think everyone is overthinking. I don't think it's someone that never thinks and just acts. I just don't believe that. But if we anyway think, let's take the moment and stop and think about the conflict in this way, like just reflect on it. I think this is something that we always miss in a conflict, to stop and think. Like we usually react or respond, but we barely stop and maybe never think. How about praying? So like really just, I think what this is really important to have this moment of stop and think, because we need to be wise in a conflict, not for our sake, even if it's our good interest too, but I think what's the bigger picture, it's God's glory.
Yeah, sure.
So if we think like this, like, okay, it's not about me or the other person or the team or wherever, or family, where the conflict is, because it's everywhere, it's about God's glory. And I think this is like how we have to have in our mind, and because it's God's glory in the middle, we shouldn't avoiding or competition or whatever.
Yeah.
I think we need to be wise with this.
Yeah, and I think it's like you said, it's a good tool.
Yes.
It's just a tool.
Yes.
But it's a good tool for self-reflection, especially, and I think it's really helpful in conflicts that are ongoing.
Oh.
So, I mean, I think we all know, we've probably all been in a conflict that like, it feels like it never ends. Like, you know, you're maybe in a relationship with someone, maybe it's a family member, and you see them every few days, or you see them every weekend or whatever, and like, there's just like this ongoing tension between you two, and, you know, there's something you don't agree on or whatever, and like, you kind of rub each other the wrong way, and it's just not, the relationship feels strained. And so in a situation like that, a tool like this is particularly helpful because daily, and we were talking about this before, but before the podcast, but I was telling you, like, as a Christian, I believe that it's part of my job every day to come before the Lord in my quiet time with Him and to ask Him to show me ways in which I'm wrong, to repent and to confess. And so as a part of that process, and, you know, thinking about, and I mean, in my situation, let's say it would be a conflict with my husband that's maybe ongoing, something we're disagreeing on or whatever, which is totally normal in marriage. This is a helpful tool for me to reflect and ask God, like, okay, am I valuing my my stance on the issue too much, or am I valuing my relationship too much and not maybe being assertive enough about a certain thing, or like, you know, asking God to show me, like, am I concerned enough for Him? Am I being too selfish here? Am I just trying to avoid this conflict? You know, am I not accommodating enough for Him? Like, and so it's just it's a good tool.
Yeah, but it's just a tool, as you said.
Sure.
And I love when you say it's my daily thing, like you daily come before the Lord and stuff. And I think that's a really good thing that we have to have in our lives, to be able to be wise and to use the tools that God gives us. And it's in the Bible, and this tool, we can use it for conflicts. But remember, it's a tool, and take time with the Lord. Yeah. I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
So in the end, I think you have 2 more things to say to us.
Yeah, I think as a Christian, I think conflict is a really delicate issue and a really, really important issue, because I think if we really think about our faith in God, and we think about our relationships with Him individually. So 2 things: how we approach conflict, it says a lot about us, and it also says a lot about how we view others.
Yes.
So we know in Scripture, Jesus talks about how whatever is in our heart determines what we say. Yeah. Right? In Matthew 12, Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees, and he says, whatever's in your heart determines what you say. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. And I tell you this, you must give an account on Judgment Day for every idle word that you speak. The words you say will either acquit you or condemn you. Yeah. And also in Matthew 15, Jesus is talking, the passage where he's talking about eating with unclean hands. Oh, yeah. And he says, but the words you speak come from the heart. That's what defiles you, right? He's talking about how you're not defiled by external things. For from the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all sexual immorality, theft, lying, and slander. These are what defile you. And so we know that when we approach conflict in a way that doesn't show that we have a pure heart, right? We approach conflict in a way that causes us to sin against others. It says a lot about our relationship with God. Yes. And it says a lot about who we believe Jesus is. And but
this is, we can see this like a reverse. when we see it shows about us, and we have to look at ourselves. And I think this is really good, and I think I need to practice this more, because sometimes, actually, for me it's easier to look at the other person. Maybe it's just me, who knows. But for me it's easier. But I want to put this perspective, like, if the way the other person is approaching the conflict, and we can see it's in a bad way, we should actually start and pray about their relationship with God.
Sure, yeah.
Because that means that if I'm bad in a conflict, that means that my relationship with God needs adjustment. But it's the same way for the other person. And instead of throwing back or whatever, you could pray for that.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think it's really important to put this, like, okay, it shows about me, and what's in my heart will come out eventually.
Yeah.
But it's the same for the person in front of me, and I should have this. I think this is a way to have this attitude.
Yeah,
will help a lot.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important to remember that both ways. Yeah, for the other person, but also for yourself.
Yes.
And like in my life, if I'm dealing with a problem with my husband or with one of my kids, and I'm having trouble keeping my temper, if I'm speaking too loudly or aggressively or whatever, like that's on me. Like there's something in my heart that's not right, and I need to ask God to address that in me, and understand that, like, and I mean, this is just the truth. This is in scripture.
Yeah.
Like, things don't come out of us that aren't there inside, right? So we know, like, if I'm yelling at my children or yelling at my husband or something, it's because there's something in me that is not right, and I need to address that. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And so yeah, how we approach conflict with people in our lives, it says so much about us, and it says so much about our relationship with God, because what is in our heart and mind, it determines how we act and how we behave. So the conclusion is then we need to approach conflict with a pure heart before God, and with our mind fixed on Jesus. Yeah. And the second thing is, how we approach conflict says a lot about how we view others and also how we view ourselves. Yeah. If we approach conflict with this lack of desire to extend grace to people, then what it means is that we have forgotten the debt that Jesus paid for us. Yes. And this story that Jesus shares in Matthew 18, where he compares the kingdom of heaven to a king who forgives the debt of one of his debtors.
I was thinking about that one right now. Yeah.
But then the man who owed the money, he turns around and he refuses to forgive the debt of the other guy. Yeah. And then the king calls him in and says, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Yeah. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you?"
Yeah. I was thinking about that, but it's so hard in English. So praise God that I didn't know. I didn't know you were about to say that.
Yeah. So. And so, but when we forget that, the debt maybe that the other person owes us is no greater than the debt that we owe to Jesus, then it changes how we think about them, and it changes how we see them, and it changes how we see our conflict with them. And also, this is just such a ouch verse. Romans 12:13. I don't know what the translation is in Romanian, but the English one is pretty funny. Don't think that you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourself by the faith God has given us. And so when we regard ourselves too highly, when we think about ourselves as though we are more important than we really are, or somehow we are more, valuable or more right,
or better,
more righteous than we actually are, that shows in a conflict. It shows outwardly in a judging attitude instead of a grace extending attitude. We judge others. We're very critical of others. When we forget that actually we also have faults, and we also have things in our lives, sin in our lives, and things that are not good either. So,
so that's Romans 12:13.
Romans 12:3.
3. Okay.
Yeah.
I already forgot that.
And so the first one was we need to approach conflict with a pure heart and a mind fixed on Jesus. Well, the second is that we need to approach conflict with humility. Yes. And so we need to sort of live our lives with this sense, this understanding of our own need for grace and forgiveness. Yeah. And so in English we would say like it's a heart posture.
Yeah.
And so we need to live our lives with that heart posture, position our heart. And so that means like we're not being defensive. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever struggled with being defensive. I definitely have.
I'm perfect, I told you.
But yeah, when we bring this sense of defensiveness to a conflict, like I need to defend myself, and I'm not going to let you tell me anything about myself that I don't think is true. We need to be willing to consider what other people are saying, this is really important, not arguing for our own righteousness. I don't know if you've ever done that before. Looked at something that someone else has done and then been like, well, I'm better than them because I don't do that.
Yeah, and that's so that brings so much I don't know if it's the right word, harm in your relationship. Sure. Because you just put yourself on a pedestal and you're like up there and you know you're not touched about sin and anything and
it's self-righteousness.
Yes.
And we're not justified by ourselves, right? We're justified by the grace of Jesus. Yeah.
Yes, and we should have this in our hearts all the time and in our mind all the time, like because of Jesus, I'm here, because of his sacrifice. And so if Jesus, our God, he created us, realize that we need his sacrifice and we need what he gave us, and he suffered so much. How can we say that we don't need that because we are perfect?
Yeah, and that understanding should be the basis of our life.
Yeah.
And so then, of course, it should affect very much the way we approach conflict and the way we approach our relationships. So, I need to be ready to respond to conflict with the same grace that was given to me by God.
Yes.
And if I'm not doing that, then I'm not following his example.
Yeah. And he said to follow him. So that's his example, which is hard. But
no, it's not easy.
It's not easy. But as I was saying before, every time we go in these steps, in Jesus' steps, it's always so much freedom over there. It's so much freedom for us because we don't have to pay for ourselves. Jesus did. We don't have to defend ourselves because Jesus said that we are his kids and that he makes us holy. And he also said that we will sin and we will have sin in our lives. And he made a way for us. So this is so helpful. So I think we kind of understand what conflict is, and I think we are already sure that we all have conflict in our lives. And I think we need to learn and remember this word, we are learning how to approach a conflict and to do it in a way that we honor God. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It was so fun.
Yeah, I liked it. I think we will do more in the future.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, as long as you are here, and I mean, actually. But it was so good, and I will take some notes, and I will try to send you the images that she said about it, and maybe have it when the video will. Yeah, we'll try. Maybe on YouTube we will try it. I'm not sure about it, but I will ask and see what we can do. And I think that's it. And thank you very much for being with us today.